If NAFTA were to be disbanded, the US, Mexico and Canada would probably revert to the tariffs that they have negotiated in the World Trade Organization, the applied or the bound tariffs that they would offer, that right now the US will have a tariff around the US against countries other than Canada and Mexico with whom it doesn't have a free trade agreement. So these tariffs would likely kick in, and that's obviously going to have negative impacts from the US standpoint on exports, particularly to Mexico. Mexico's become a very important market for, it accounts for about 28% of the US corn crop and about a third of US beef exports. In terms of commodity rankings, corn's our #1 export to Mexico, followed by soybeans, then pork, dairy, and prepared food. So this would have a significant effect on trade flows between the three countries, and the US would lose zero tariff access to an important export market, which is Mexico and Canada. Mexico can't raise tariffs in a discriminatory way against the US and not do it against Brazil and Argentina. And so as those tariffs level out, you know, the US tariff, the import tariff against US imports comes up, that will start pushing Mexican demand to Brazil in particular, I think. And, you know, especially second crop corn, I think, could become more and more important for the Mexicans. The problem for Mexico is the transport costs are going to be much, much higher from Latin America. I mean, obviously, Mexico is contiguous with the US. We can transport, rail, truck corn and beans into Mexico really easy to put into their livestock production sector. I think the thing that's probably going to happen in the next round of negotiations, and the Canadians were suggesting this last week in discussions in Ottawa, that they think the administration's there's a memorandum will come from the president that says in 6 months we're going to withdraw from NAFTA to put pressure on the negotiations.
So there's a window.
Yeah, and I think that window's there it's a bargaining chip, but it maybe reduces, you know, gives a little time for the Canadians and Mexicans to figure out how to respond to that. I think, you know, speaking as a trade economist, my feeling is that the administration sees trade agreements as a zero-sum game. There's a winner and there's a loser. The US wants to be the winner. They're laying down bargaining chips. And the Canadians and the Mexicans are saying, hey, we're not necessarily willing to play along with this just because you say we should accept your bargaining positions. I think it's not the normal way that trade negotiations occur. They occur with, you have reciprocity. You give me market access, I'll give you market access. It's kind of a quid pro quo.
How does then that translate to, getting back to the
agriculture
sector, any immediate market impacts, or does that kind of down the road?
Well, I think there's in terms of, we lose, if Mexico and Canada the NAFTA breaks up, we lose large export markets. And particularly in grain and oilseeds, we already have relatively low prices. You know, we've had low prices over the last 2 or 3 years. That corn and soybeans has got to find a market. It's likely to drive down prices further. And this is why, you know, the Secretary of Agriculture has warned that if NAFTA breaks up, we may have to put farm supports back into the Farm Bill. And there's already discussion about using a rainy day fund to try to help out farmers. So I think there's a potential for prices, maybe not to collapse, but certainly to decline, and we would lose export markets. If NAFTA breaks down and it's much harder to export to Mexico, then obviously that has a feedback effect here in the US. Lower corn prices, lower soybean prices, etc. potentially, or, you know, there's less of an export market. Farmers maybe pull back their production. I guess that would mean farmers maybe put their investment decisions on hold, or they don't replace it as quickly as they otherwise would have done. But it's very interesting. Mexico is now the second largest export market for farm equipment and parts. So if we would not just lose, I think that the equipment industry would lose sales here in the US, but would lose sales to Mexico and possibly to Canada as well. So I think there would be negative feedback effects, not just on farm equipment, but on fertilizers, on seed production, on all the major inputs into the agricultural sector.